Needing motivation is one of the biggest scams currently in the fitness industry. And as we'll discover in this video, you don't need more of it. What you actually need is to stop overriding your own biology. Because every time you lack motivation, what you're simply doing is you're ignoring extremely important data that is coming from your own physiology that, if not listened to, can have a consequential effect down the line, what you see often, that keeps you running around in these vicious circles of never achieving your fitness or health goals. So in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to show you why needing motivation is one of the worst strategies in order to achieve your fitness and health goals. And I'm also going to show you a other way that is much more effortless and sustainable so that you never need this idea of motivation ever again. So who am I? If you're new to the channel, I'm Tim, and I help men who are fed up with having physical issues they've developed by more traditional forms of fitness and health, so they can actually build an athletic, lean and pain-free body in less than 1.5 hours a week. And we do this by being extremely precise with signaling growth on two fundamental physical capacities that are vital to how we move. And we provide the necessary fundamental building blocks for healing and recovery to happen, so that we can also enjoy this athletic body that we've built over time. Now, as I already mentioned, most men think that motivation is the core driver for reaching certain goals, whether it's fitness or health related. But actually, elements like discipline or needing discipline or needing to show up week after week, time after time again, and then labeling these elements as character traits that you need to have installed in order to achieve those goals, are actually all external stimuli. So they are sending or signals that are coming from everything outside of your physiology and biology that are influencing what is actually happening underneath the hood, and are tampering with your listening capacity of internal cues. So things of, if you don't want to go, what you hear often is, yeah, but you got to show up. If you feel sore, keep going, keep showing up for a CrossFit class. If you feel hungry, stay on the money, stay on the ball, make sure that you're focused, got even more. Like all of these so-called motivators and elements which we label as the prerequisites for achieving our fitness and health goals, are actually just simple external cues that are masking potential internal cues that are revealing something that are very important for us. And once we start listening to those internal cues, as we'll see in a second, you will actually achieve your fitness and health goals, because the problem isn't that you lack these elements. The problem isn't that you don't have discipline or you're not consistent. It's because every time you listen to an external stimuli, somebody like David Goggins that tells you to push harder, etc., you're disconnecting with your own biology. And that is one of the core reasons why most people and most men that I work with have a hard time actually achieving their fitness and health goals. So you're not lacking motivation. What you've lacked is a way of listening to your own body's signals that will actually get you towards the areas that you want. And the reason why I know this is because I've spent years trying to follow external pieces of information, external stimuli, external voices, gurus that told you to intermittent fast, cut down on carbs, that have you train harder, train more. And I dedicate the majority of my physical growth, at least from a output perspective, towards being in an environment that helped me push through these elements. But in hindsight, it was also a process that had many flaws looking back on it, because I knew if I came to the environment, if I came to the program, if I came to the class, then everything would sort itself. But most of the time, outside of these elements or outside of the environment, I had to summon massive amounts of energy. I felt sore many times. I didn't feel like showing up. And rather than listening to those pausing and saying, okay, well, what's going on underneath the hood here? I just was relentless and kept going because that is what the environment told me to do so. So yes, I gained a lot of results by doing just sheer amount of work, but in hindsight, it did take a lot of, it did take a big toll. And I also saw that back in how I approach my nutrition. Even though I come from a background of studying nutrition and dietetics, I also thought, or at least I was under the assumption that you should be restricted on certain calories if you want to lose weight or lose body fat. You should hammer down on a lot of fiber, on all of these elements that are mainstream and that we tend to believe. However, I still had massive amount of cravings every 3 weeks where I also binged, even though I didn't want to. And every time I did, I blamed myself in this pursuit. And this creates this sort of internalization and blaming effect on sort of catastrophizing yourself as a person that doesn't have the genetics or doesn't have the mentality or doesn't have the XYZ to achieve those fitness or health goals. But the more I dove deeper into the realm of physiology and looking at sort of a perspective of prioritizing energy as a primary vehicle, that shifted everything for me. And I noticed that all of the times when I pushed through based on an external stimuli, I was disconnecting more with my own physiology and biology. So let me just quickly show you why this is so important. And the one model that I want you to understand as a perspective here is that our body runs on two opposing sides. It is always in a balanced state between, or hopefully in a balanced state between catabolizing and anabolizing, meaning that in a catabolic environment or more in a catabolic state, you're breaking down either energy or elements of your structure or the creation of enzymes, etc., in order to put out, in order to perform, in order to move. So it's more of a stressed and pressurized environment, but it's also an important environment, right? If we want to move, we want to move in life, get better, get stronger, get smarter, get whatever. We need this catabolic part. However, we also have a synergetic anabolic part, meaning that for every time we put out, we also need to put in to make sure that we replenish, we recuperate, and we recover in the necessary fashion so that we keep this optimal state of being in a catabolic or anabolic state alive. And that is what the body always tries to do, because it tries to make sure or mitigate spending energy versus conserving energy, and is looking for this in a homeostatic fashion. So it's always trying to achieve a level of balance in order to make sure that you are in the most optimal way of interacting with your environment while also feeling good in general. However, what I tend to see with a lot of the men that I help is that over time, cumulatively, they have spent much more time in a catabolic state. They have spent much more time in an environment where they are putting out time and time again, not giving the body the necessary time and the necessary nutrients and the necessary elements in order to restore, replenish, recover, recuperate. So this is one of the biggest problems, and that's what you already saw before with the examples that I gave. It's the idea that we're overruling certain elements of ourselves that are basically telling us what we need to do. So if you feel like you're if you're tired, for example, that is a signal or potential signal of many elements from our physiology telling us something that we need to respect. And if not, we keep ourselves in this catabolic environment. So once you feel certain symptoms arise, that is not your biology that is lying, that's actually sending very powerful signals. So things you could experience, or some things that could happen from excessive exposure to being more on this catabolic side or catabolic state, is that maybe you have joints that are more inflamed or face chronic inflammation because the tissues have not had enough nutrients or time to recover yet. Maybe you wake up very frequently in the night where you have a cortisol spike, meaning that your blood sugar is dropping, and that could mean that you have an overall low storage of glycogen, or that you have a low amount of carbohydrates coming into the system that are well digested. Or if you frequently pee enough, which means that you're have a discrepancy between the amount of water you're taking in versus the minerals that should actually come into the cells for their functioning. Or you feel a decline in your gym performance. If twice in a row you're not seeing progress in your fitness pursuit or in your gym performance, that is a signal. That's a signal that you should listen to, because it could mean that you're not having enough calories coming in, you're depleted of all other elements that should improve your performance, or tissues are inflamed. Like, there are a lot of things that could be going on there. Or stubborn belly fat, a very interesting element that I see a lot with the men that come into the program. They say that their nutrition is on point, but if we look at their body composition, you can see that there's definitely some stubborn belly fat. And when you dig deeper, they've been exposed to a low caloric intake for a very long period of time. They have been exposed to a lot of intermittent fasting, which means that they've been in a chronic stressed state, which is cortisol driven. And fat is meant to store as a protective element, so that once we need energy in systems or in dire situations, we have energy or potential energy available. So storage of fat is a signal that your body doesn't feel like it's thriving. It's more in survival mode. Cold hands and feet, which could mean that you have low thyroid output, low libido and drive. Could mean that your steroid hormones are on the lower side, and its convergence is not working in the right way. Sugar cravings could also mean have symptoms related to insulin resistance, or poor shuttling of glucose to your cells. Like, all of these elements are biological signals that we're overruling based on what the fitness industry is telling us. And this is just a small piece of it, right? There are many more. But every time we feel like we need to show up, we do the thing, we're basically spending more time in this catabolic state. And that has a cascading effect, because at one point the body is simply just shutting down systems or lowering the performance of systems, because it wants to conserve, because it feels like it's in a stressed survival state. So motivation has nothing to do with your character. It's a simple, systematic, biological misalignment in which it is spending more time breaking down structures or elements of your organism versus building it up. So if we know this, if we know that if you have certain symptoms, or if you are not listening to certain signals because you're operating from a system that is reliant on listening to external stimuli, how do we flip it? Well, that's twofolded. And first, we look at the catabolic side. So for our fitness goals, in order to achieve this athletic and pain-free body, we still want to make sure that we're growing tissue. So we still want to make sure that we align with physiology in order to grow better, stronger, and more adaptive. Now, one thing we want to do here is we want to be much more precise with how we're signaling this reorientation of tissue or restructuring of tissue. So we want to be catabolic precise, which means that we want to induce a signal that is only meant for the body to grow. So the things that we want to avoid is we want to avoid doing lots and lots of cardio where we're only trying to address muscle type 1 fibers, where we're also creating much more stress on the joints, and we're also decreasing potential muscle mass. We also want to avoid doing lots and lots of stretching in order to mitigate certain pains, because stretching is simply a sensing mechanism where you're moving towards your end range of motion, and that's it. You're not signaling the brain and the nervous system any form of communication or any form of signaling that it needs to or that you control certain ranges based on the input that you're giving. So if you're just stretching all the time, thinking that you're dissipating pain, even though it might give you some relief in the moment, but it always comes back, something to avoid, because again, you're spending just a lot of time doing something that doesn't stimulate growth or improvements at all, or spending a lot of hours per week, and I'm not even counting traveling time here, doing resistance training, full body workouts, where your objective or basically where your input is most of the time spent on not stimulating growth, because your max threshold, as we'll see in a second, only relies on one type of signal in order for it to change. So rather than having this section or a small fraction of a set that is actually stimulating growth, you're spending way too much time on just doing work without actually signaling change. But that doing work does mean or does require you burning energy, burning elements of your structure, that if you don't recover from it, you will face more of these catabolic elements and are more in this stressed state a longer period of time. So rather than having this shotgun approach, because the fitness industry tells you that you need to do massive amounts of cardio, resistance training, and a lot of stretching, we want to swap this. We want to be extremely precise. And the protocol that I'm running, we do this in 1.5 hours of total training time. You don't have to do this as well. But my core recommendation here is that you switch from doing all of these various elements and only focus right now on stimulating growth at the level of your tissue. Just getting your tissue, skeletal muscle, connective tissue at a full range stronger, because the growth of skeletal tissue means more that you're also increasing your basal metabolic rate, that you're also potentially increasing the potency of your metabolism, and what you also want to do is decrease all of the other elements that could have an inflammatory effect. So in practical sense, that means training for one set, targeting the largest muscle groups over a couple of movement patterns. And the way I like to do that is being very precise here. So in the setup that I go for is we go immediately to your max capacity of your tissues, and therefore adhere to this principle called mechanotransduction, which is basically telling our tissues work with the cells in our tissues work with an all or nothing approach, which is activated once a certain level of tension is met from a mechanical sense, so from your tissues perspective. And what we try to do is we try to go there as quickly as we can and stay there for as long as possible, or in a classical sense or more traditional gym sense, this could mean that you're training only one set and go to failure in that set as much as you can, so that you're stimulating your tissue's max capacity, focusing primarily on type 2C fibers or your max muscle fibers that only get recruited for the highest amount of force. And as the moment you stay there during a set, or in our case as well during a set for the highest regard, you're not only stimulating these muscle groups, but you're stimulating all muscle groups as a consequence as well. So therefore training your aerobic and anaerobic muscle fibers all. And in terms of end range conditioning, instead of stretching, you pick a couple of positions that cause most restrictions. You go there using a stretch. So we do use a stretch to get to our end range, but you then provide a max stimulus, maximal contraction as hard as you can for a brief moment in time, so that you're actually signaling the brain and the nervous system you control that range. And you're also signaling, of course, tissues or elements to or signaling growth at the level of your tissues, connective tissue specifically, to change and remodel and create buffers so that you can actually exert force in these end range position and decrease restrictions over time. So we want to go for a sniper approach here. We get in, we do our job, we provide a max stimulus no matter what we're doing, and we're decreasing overall stress on the system while still stimulating growth of our tissues to happen. Now the second part, so this is the first part, the second part is I would say just as important, sometimes even more important, because it's such a wider element. And that is, we want to be deliberate, but be very generous with how we're creating an anabolic environment so that our body can actually grow. And that is done by making sure that we're switching from doing all of these elements that we think are good for the body, but are actually providing the body with an environment that signals it can restore, recuperate, replenish, and move. And by further, I mean, of course, getting better, stronger, and more adaptive over time. So what doesn't that mean? It doesn't mean that you should be okay with 6 hours of sleep. It doesn't mean that you get your primary protein resources from protein shakes. It doesn't mean that you most of the time eat processed, ultra processed junk, traditional fast foods, but also processed foods like certain quarks. Or a big one is eating behind screens, which is one of the dumbest things you can do, and it's something I also did a lot. But it's actually keeping yourself in a sympathetic state, and sympathetic state has a harder time creating the necessary enzymes for digestion. And if you have poor digestion or poor absorption of foods, it could lead to certain endotoxins, which have a harder time, or it could create digestive issues. Like, all of these elements have a cascading effect. Or answering your emails at 9 p.m., which means that you have excessive blue light exposure, meaning that you're still in a very high cortisol state where normally melatonin should be higher, or intermittent fasting, or being in a low caloric environment, which is what I see a lot with the men that I help, which they think is good, but it's actually signaling the body it should rely on stress or stress-induced pathways in order to create energy or make energy available, but that comes at a price. And that price is often what I already mentioned: stubborn body fat, feeling low libido, because simply you're signaling the body that it should survive rather than thrive. But if you switch it and you prioritize getting your proteins and fat from animal fat and animal proteins like meats, from bone broth, from dairy, etc., those are excellent resources and are well digested. It's where basically our genetic makeup is made for. Getting your carbohydrates, plenty of them, based on your output of training or output of muscle mass or tissue size, with fruits like fruits and honey, or carbohydrates like potatoes, some white rice, or raw milk, which is one of the best anabolic and underutilized ingredients, or goat milk if you cannot tolerate the type A1 milk. Organ meats, eating nose to tail, like one of the biggest micronutrient providers out there, and just give your body a positive shock of all of the nutrients it needs in order to convert potential energy into energy. Making sleep your cornerstone, a cornerstone, a corner pillar in how you function, because like almost all recovery and replenishment comes from having proper sleep. Limiting blue light exposure, being as much time outside as you can, eating in the sun if possible, or eating at least sometimes outdoors, having little to zero supplement stack, because simply you're providing all of the necessary nutrients that coming into the system from substrates, from fruits, from sunlight exposure, etc. So if you're very generous and deliberate with the anabolic side of your organism in this homeostatic pursuit on a day-to-day basis, you will see that over time you will shift from being more in a catabolic state or in a stressed environment towards being more in an anabolic environment, or at least have the ratios very well aligned so that the body feels that you can put out at the maximum regard. You have incredible focus, you have no need for caffeine, you can have stable blood sugar levels, and you can perform at the highest regard as you want to, but you also know how to down-regulate, how to shut off, how to make sure that there is an anabolic environment where replenishment, recuperation, restoring of the central nervous system, storage of energy, if that is all in place, then these ratios are much more aligned, and that will be a effect of making sure that this environment is much more switched towards all of these elements, or certain elements that you can see here. But these are, I think, one of the biggest pillars that you can start to incorporate in order to switch from a stressed state to more of a parasympathetic or energetic state. So these two pillars should be cornerstones for you if you want to achieve this athletic, lean, and pain-free body. Whereas in the approach that I go for, I like to work with just a couple of movement patterns that utilize the largest tissues that we have. They utilize all ranges of motion that we can move into, and utilize also rotational work that has a very migrating effect or alignment with locomoting through space, being very precise with how we signal it, and also making sure that the anabolic environment is rich, is nutrient dense, it's in a parasympathetic state, so that recovery, that replenishment, and realignment, restructuring of tissue can happen at the most optimal regard. Now, some results that come out of if you align with these is, for example, client Bob that came to me, who was on a 1700 calorie diet, who trained much more previously. We switched to a 90-day program for him, and we also had him increase his caloric intake and also working or having more elements of walking in there, and then he already lost quite some fat around his visceral area and also became stronger. Or Keith, a 67-year-old power lifter, been working at it for 30 years and came to me with hip issues, shoulder issues, and his performance declined over the years due to a hip replacement, and now has an increase in his deadlift for, I think, around 20%, starting at 285 pounds, now increased to 345 pounds without excessive warm-ups like he did in the past. And he's also working full ranges that he didn't done prior. So hip has never felt better. His shoulders also seen great improvements. Or another client of mine who lost a lot of visceral and body fat and weight, while also getting stronger, while also managing a business, while also having a household of 5 children. So this shows you that if you're very precise with your signaling and you still create an environment where recovery takes place optimally, you can see that you don't have to do these excessive workouts, excessive training bouts, and being very restrictive in how you eat, because actually the opposite works much better. Or a client that just came into the protocol and after 4 weeks unlocked from a normal push-up towards a tuck planche push-up. Amazing to see. Also less elbow pain and less lower back pain, which always arose to the surface in certain situations, and he's also seen an increase of 2 kg in lean tissue, which is massive. And then also another client, Gio, who came to me a couple of years ago, and he worked on strength and mobility, and we specifically worked on his hips because he faced a ankle injury, a pretty massive one, when he was 15, therefore could never achieve a deep squat. After 3 months into the protocol, we helped him unlock the deep squat by focusing on his hips predominantly, and he's seeing massive results also in his strength output. And these are just some results of men that, you know, have altered this balance between being more in the catabolic side and an anabolic side, and also being much more precise with how they induced a stimuli, and also much more deliberate in how they create the environment for tissue to grow and become better and stronger. So this is the roadmap if you want to achieve this athletic, lean, and pain-free physique. And if you want to do it in 1.5 hours, being maximally efficient, you can apply in the link below to the program. And if not, you can check out multiple videos where I dive deeper into the elements of this entire blueprint. But hopefully by now you know that motivation is a simple biological mismatch that you can alter very quickly if you start listening to your physiological signals and being very precise with how you signal change, and being very deliberate and sort of have a lot of time spent on how you provide the necessary room for growth to happen. This was it. Hope you enjoyed it, and leave any questions in the comments below or apply to the program, and see you in the next one.